What's going on, guys? BouseFeenux here, and I'm excited to tell you that the months of waiting are over. Absolver is here, and I can finally review it. Now, if you were around last week for my live stream, you got to see a lot of the gameplay early, as the developers of the game were kind enough to give early access to a handful of content creators, and the short of it is, people generally like the game, but there's got to be more to it than that, right? I mean, the title does say in-depth review, so you'd probably expect a little more out of this video than just a short paragraph, and you're right. I've got a lot to say about this game, so let's get started by talking about what Absolver actually is. Before we do that, though, just real quick, I wanted to let you guys know that, for reference, I have beaten the main story portion of the game, and I've put about 12 hours of playtime into it so far. I've played solo and co-op extensively, and a little bit of the PvP. So, overview time. What is Absolver? Well, Absolver is, at its core, a deep, online-focused melee combat game with a hint of exploration and a semi-open world thrown in for good measure. It's got a solid multiplayer aspect, which we'll cover here in a bit, and your typical RPG elements, some of which have an interesting new twist. Absolver is out now as of August 29th on PC and PS4 for the very enticing price point of $30, which gets you the game, and from what the devs are saying, tons of future content for free, so that's pretty nice. There's also no season pass or microtransactions in the game. You get the whole experience for $30, which, in today's world of gaming, is extremely rare in and of itself. Let's dive a little deeper, though. Let's talk about what Absolver actually is versus what people thought it would be. Most of us expected Absolver to be a deeply complex fighting game set in a massive, always online world, kind of like For Honor, but an MMO. There'd be tons of quests for you and your buddies to embark on, people to fight, clans to create, and tons to see. Well, the reality of it is that the game is pretty small, like really small. For example, you can see pretty much everything the game offers in terms of environments in about 20 to 25 minutes if you know where you're going. In addition to that, the main story campaign part of the game can be completed in about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and honestly, the campaign is more of an extended tutorial that works to get you familiar with the game than anything. Now, in my experience, I don't really feel like I learned too much about the game while doing the main story. By the time it was over, I felt like things were just getting started. But, for example, when you beat the game, quote-unquote, you're just sent back to the main area to participate in PvP, farm gear you may not have from enemies in the world, and learn more moves for your combat deck. Now, that's definitely not to say the game isn't insanely deep in terms of its combat, but we'll get more into that later. In the story, though, you start as a prospect sent to the plains of Adal with the singular purpose of taking down those that have been deemed marked ones, with the final goal of climbing the large tower in the center of the world for one final showdown to defeat the final boss and become an Absolver. These marked ones serve to more or less be mini-bosses in the world, and there are a handful of actual bosses that you'll fight after defeating them. When starting the game, you'll have access to a very basic character creator, which lets you choose the sex of your character, skin tone, hairstyle, etc., and you'll also have the option of choosing one of 3 fighting styles that define your character. Once you choose this style, your character is pretty much stuck with it, but honestly, this isn't that big of a deal, as if you want to try the other styles, you just make a new character and beat the game again in about 2 hours or so. As for the fighting styles, like I said, you'll have 3 to choose from. You've got the Forsaken, which is a balanced combat style with the parry ability, which blocks an attack and slows your opponent. Then you have the Cult method, which is a more tanky combat style that boasts the Absorb ability, allowing you to recover lost health from enemy blows if timed correctly. And lastly, we have the Windfall style, which is my personal favorite. The Windfall style focuses mainly on dexterity-based moves and has the Avoid ability, which is an evasive move that feels super satisfying to pull off. As you adventure in the world, you'll learn moves from enemies in the game or from real players that you choose to fight against. These moves can then be used in strings of combos that you'll use in combat. This is called your combat deck. You've got 4 stances in the game that your character switches between when fighting, and for each stance you can have up to 3 moves equipped. Additionally, you can have alternate attacks that you can use at any point in one of these combos that you equip to one of your 4 stances. While in combat, you can attack, block, dodge, or perform the special combat ability that's associated with your style. You also have the option of feinting almost any attack, which gives you this dope-looking ghost effect. And on top of all this, you also have your shard abilities. As you land attacks or successfully perform defensive actions, your shards fill up. You can then use these shards to perform special abilities like summoning an equipped weapon, healing, crowd control, or some of these abilities put debuffs on your enemies. So how does the combat feel? What are the controls like? Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but there are some things I really like and some things that I don't. But that's pretty much going to be the case with anything, right? But for starters, the actual fighting feels really smooth. The controls are responsive, and even though the game recommends using a gamepad, I found keyboard controls to be really well done, which is kind of crazy because I almost always use a gamepad for games like this. My advice is to try both and see which of them you like better. The two things I don't like on gamepad though are the target switching, which feels really clunky, and switching stances, which is really weird to do sometimes. If they fix those somehow, I think the game will control a lot better. On mouse and keyboard, I don't like the fact that you have to use your special ability by moving the mouse around. Thankfully though, the controls are rebindable. I know I sound excited about this and it seems like a weird thing to be happy about, but so many games miss this fundamental customization option, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one that feels this way. Moving on though, let's talk about progression in the game. We've already mentioned the combat deck, but along with that, you'll gain skill points which you can assign to several basic attributes that increase your stats. In addition to these, you'll also find different gear pieces throughout the world, and pretty much all these do stat-wise is affect your defense and your mobility stat. Mobility in this game affects how fast you move, how much damage your attacks do, and your stamina recovery speed, so you'll need to experiment with different pieces of gear in an effort to find that balance between protection, mobility, and attack damage. But now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's get into sound design, graphics, and all that fun stuff. For the sound, I feel like it does its job. Some of the impact sounds are incredibly satisfying and serve their purpose with what you see on screen. Attacks that look like they hit hard, sound like they hit hard, and that's really good enough for me, at least. While streaming the game, though, and just from what I've heard from other people, there are a few players here and there that aren't really a fan of the punching sounds, and at some points, I can see where they're coming from, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal to me. I'm fine with the sound design so far in the game, but when you're not fighting, it's actually very quiet in the game world. You'll hear the occasional nature sound or some very low ambient music, but overall, the world has this really cool feeling sound-wise, like you're walking through an area that's just completely stopped in time. It's very zen, and the sound design actually makes this the most peaceful feeling fighting game I've ever played, if you can imagine something like that. Graphics-wise, I really dig the art style. A lot of people don't, because in today's world we have a bunch of little kids that play games that don't understand art direction, and they tend to think that everything should be hyper-realistic. Now, I'm all for that depending on the game, but I do very much enjoy the low-poly art style of Absolver. I don't feel like it takes anything away from the experience at all, and with the way the lighting is done, the game feels rich in color and visual fidelity, but this is something completely subjective, because you know what they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or in this case, the Absolver, am I right? Anyway, as for game performance, Absolver has some fairly low system requirements on PC. With recommended specs, they claim you can run the game at 60 frames per second. I'm not really sure what graphics settings you can crank it up to with that setup, but the recommended graphics card is a GTX 960 or Radeon R9 380, both with 2 GB of VRAM, and both of those are fairly old graphics cards. I had a 960 in my rig about 3 years ago, so if that's what you've got, or you've upgraded since then, you should be good to go to play this game on PC. For the processor, they recommend at least an i5, and for RAM, they're asking for 8 gigs, which isn't too steep if you've got a computer made within the last 2 years or so. I'm running the game on a GTX 1070 at max settings, and it's been smooth for me with the occasional frame drop when I go to a new area, which I'm just gonna chalk up to poor optimization because there are no loading screens when you transition to a new area. On the PS4, the game is supposed to run at a solid 30 frames per second. I'm not really sure why they went with that, because the game isn't too graphically demanding, at least from what it looks like, but it's 30 frames on PS4 for those of you that are wondering. For the game camera, I gotta say it's one of the features where Absolver falls short. The camera system is just flat out bad sometimes. A lot of the encounters in the game pit you against multiple enemies at the same time, and if you get backed into a corner, you literally can't see what's going on, and if you're getting bodied, you can't even move, so it becomes really frustrating. I will say the camera design is one of the few things in this game that makes it feel like development was super rushed and not very well thought out. But with that in mind, let's sum up everything we've got so far, and I'll give you some of my final thoughts and opinions on the game. Firstly, gameplay is really solid. The animations for the moves look really cool, everything flows really well, and when you finally get your combat deck down and you master your given combat style, the game is very rewarding to play. Next, the controls. These are still a point of contention for me. Attacking, guarding, and dodging feels really good, but switching stances and switching targets feels extremely clunky and not very well thought out for a fighting game. And this is kind of a big deal, seeing as these two things are huge parts of your combat. As for progression, it feels pretty rewarding, and there's tons of moves to learn, gear pieces to find, and pretty much infinite ways to customize your combat deck. For content, it feels a little lacking though. Currently at launch, there's the main campaign, which is only a couple of hours long, and the 1v1 PvP mode. Outside of that, you can wander around and fight or help people in the world that you come across. Now, they are planning on adding a 3v3 PvP mode later down the line, and they mentioned that they have a lot of other plans for the game, but at this point, it does feel a little bare bones, even at the $30 price point. So overall, I really like the game. I like the concept of Absolver. As it stands right now, I'm not sure it has any kind of staying power though. I feel like this is a game that I'll maybe check back in on every once in a while and see how it's progressing, but at this point, I'm not really sure it's something that I'm going to be replacing my other staple games with, at least right away. But that being said, I do recommend at least checking it out, and for only $30, it's not that big of a hit to your wallet. Plus, there is always the chance that the game's potential will be fully realized one day, and you'll have a great little gem tucked away in your game library. But that is pretty much all I have to say on Absolver. I really hope this video was interesting for you guys because I very much enjoyed making it. It is super nice to put something a little different on my channel from time to time, and this is a title that you guys have been asking me to look at for months, so I feel like we both sort of won today. Anyway, if you did enjoy the video, don't forget to support it with a like, and if you're interested in seeing more Absolver content in the future, let me know by leaving a comment down below, or you can join my Discord by using the link in the description and let me know personally what you thought. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I mainly cover For Honor, but I am looking at adding some more stuff like this in the future. But until next time, I'm BouseFeenux. I'll see you at the next one, and as always, thank you so much for watching.